My name's Fiona Kean, and I'm here to talk about five relatives who were in the First World War. I only know a little about each one, so that's, I guess, why I'm covering all five. The first one is William Wright, and he was my grandfather. So my mother's father, my mother's still alive, so I was could ask her some questions before coming here. The sad thing is, I guess, in a way, that he never really spoke about his service, and so the things that I know really are gleaned from maybe some of the records. Basically, he enlisted right at the beginning, I think just a couple of days after the war was announced, and he went as part of the Samoan advance and spent time in Samoa before returning to New Zealand. He then turned around and went to Gallipoli and arrived in Gallipoli in June and went to the Dardanelles. He then from there went to Belgium and to France, and managed to somehow survive all those experiences, but he was discharged unfit at the beginning of 1918, and he returned to New Zealand before the war was over. He died a long time ago. He died in the 1950s, and my mother has always said that that was as a result of his war service. He died, I believe he died in his late 50s, and she says, mother has told me that he was gassed over in France, and from his record what I can gather is he was wounded, and he had, I think his discharge was due to a throat condition, so that may have been due to gas exposure. I'm not sure. And I don't have any pictures of him as a soldier. In fact, this is the only picture I have of him, full stop.
So I hold it up to the camera.
Yeah. So that was a picture, I believe, at one of my mother's siblings' wedding. And my grandmother there, this must have been prior to 1948, because she died in 1948. So it's a very long time ago. From my own experience of his story, the one thing that I always thought was strange was that when we visited, they're buried in Wanganui, and when we visited the cemetery, I always thought it was very odd that he wasn't buried with his wife. He was in a different section of the cemetery, and I guess, until I started to have a look at his war service, I didn't realise really what the Samoan advance was. And so in his section where he is in the cemetery, on his headstone it says Samoan advance, and I think I understand that a lot better now, the part that the war played in his life, and the reason why he may have wanted to be buried with his comrades rather than, because he's buried in the soldier section of the cemetery, rather than being buried with his wife. So I think I have a better understanding of that now, and possibly don't think it's as strange as I did when I was younger. Yeah. So that's my grandfather. The next soldier is Charles Raymond Carter, and he was my mother's uncle, so my great uncle. He enlisted at the beginning of the war. Again, I think it was in September of 1914. He was in the Auckland Regiment. He enlisted from Cambridge, where he was in the telegraph department in Cambridge, and he distinguished himself during the First World War. He won the military medal, and the story that I was always told as a child was that A, his medals were at Wairuru, and B, that when he received his medals they were presented to him by King George. And and that there was a photograph to prove it. It wasn't just a family fable. but I'd never seen the photo. And one of the wonderful things about, I guess, doing all the research that I've done on the First World War about other people's families is that while I was doing that research, a woman brought in to the collection some Auckland Weekly News that had been found under the floor, I think, over at the Mount. Her mother had found them when they were doing something with the house, and she brought them in for me to look at. And as I was going through them, lo and behold, but there was the photo of Charles Raymond Carter, who was known as Max by his mates, receiving his medal by the King. So that was a really special day for me because, as I said, I'd never seen a picture of him, and I'd heard about this for years and years and years, but never seen any evidence of it, and there it was in the Auckland Weekly News.
Isn't that wonderful when family stories turn out to be absolutely true?
So very rarely. So he got the military medal, and sadly, pretty much a month later, he was killed in action in September 1918. So he had gone through, very similar to my grandfather, to just about every field of battle that the New Zealanders were part of, and sadly he didn't come home. So one thing that is kind of special is that he's mentioned in Burton's Auckland Regiment book, because he did serve for so long, and also he was a non-commissioned officer by the time he was killed, and it just says in Burton's book that where is it? It says in Burton's book, Lieutenant Carter, who was a signal corporal, had done so well on the 15th of September 1916. He was wounded mortally, and he was very well known in the regiment and was extremely popular. So it was kind of nice to come across something that said one of your relatives was extremely popular. So so that's Charles Raymond Carter. The next two I'll do together, they were brothers, Alistair Thompson and Ian Thompson, and they were known, Alistair was known as Pip, and that's a picture of him there, and his brother Ian was known as Moke, so it was Pip and Moke. They were the sons of a minister in Petone, Wellington, and that's their father there. And the reason why he's relevant, I guess, to the story is that their father passed away in 1914, so just prior to the war breaking out. And the family story is that the family was quite hard up at that time, obviously, with the father passing away, and the two boys were the breadwinners, if you like, in the family. My understanding is that Alistair was a lawyer and Ian was an engineer, and so they really assumed the role of caring for quite a large family of daughters and their mother. The family story is that in 1915 they received, or late 1915, they received a white feather in the family's letterbox, and to basically shame the two boys into going and enlisting in the war. And again, this is a family story. It was said that it was one of the Seddon girls, so Richard Seddon, the premier of ex-premier of New Zealand, it was one of the girls from his family that had, and that there was a connection between the two families, because apparently Tom Seddon, the son of Richard Seddon, was also a lawyer, and there may have been some connection there. I've done a little bit of digging, and I can't substantiate that, so I apologise to the Seddon family if that's not the case. It is interesting though, because I read Thomas Seddon's autobiography, and in it he recounts that after the war was declared, the day after, they sat around the table and discussed how if you had an ounce of patriotism, you would enlist immediately, and that their mother came in and said to them, of course all you sons will enlist immediately. So the way he writes the story of their family, it seems that they felt very strongly that that was everyone's patriotic duty. So I may be leaping, but if that was the sentiment of the time, then possibly, I don't know, but I have no evidence of that. So they both enlisted, and they both went off, and they were both killed in action. Alistair was killed in the Somme, and Ian was killed in France in 1917. So neither of them returned. And by chance, it's quite nice, I was in contact with a man who, on behalf of the New Zealand Law Society, has put together a roll of honour for New Zealand lawyers at the time who died in the First World War, and he put together a short piece on Alistair, and when he did that, he came across a eulogy to Alistair in the Freelance. And this was the first time we had, as a family, realised that somebody had put in something about Alistair, and it's dated the 30th of June 1916. It's actually very sad. I'm not sure I can read it, but maybe you can read a little bit of it. Would that be okay? Okay.
Where from?
Maybe from with his shrewd and keen and kindly.
With his shrewd and keen and kindly eyes for the eccentricities and the humours of humanity, he found the world a very entertaining place, and his retinue of friends was long and picturesque, embracing as it did representatives from all classes of society. Many a member of that depressed fraternity that drifts through all offices, many a disreputable old deadbeat and broken-down vendor of dog-eared music, doubtful boot polish and venerable soap will miss his ever-ready shilling, and remember wistfully the wide and friendly smile he turned alike on the rich and the poor, the just and the unjust, the sheep and the goats. A fine footballer, good sport, and good pal to the fingertips of his sensitive, beautiful hands, essentially fair-minded and high-principled, he saw life steadily and saw it whole, and picked no quarrel with fate.
I know. It's quite hard to read. Yes, so that's the Thompson boys. Yeah.
How very interesting.
So those are three.
So you've got different families that you're talking about, obviously, but what do you think was the effect of the war service on the families?
I think for the Thompson family it was particularly difficult. It was, I think it had a deep and lasting impact, because certainly out of all of the things that I've heard over the, just little snippets of things that might have been mentioned, the most feeling has been about the two boys, Pip and Moke, and about I guess the situation that it left the family in, and the fact that they died, and and it only left one boy and a group of sisters, and no father there, and
that white feather, which was such a nasty way of communicating, with the not anonymous white feather in the letterbox. Would leave a bad taste.
And it certainly is a story that has been retold in my family about that feather. So yeah, it hasn't been forgotten. and with the others, I mean, I've always been conscious, I guess, on Dad's father's side, that, you know, that my other grandfather actually never went to the war, and that he was a farmer, and he actually married in 1915, so he married during the war as well. So, which actually, I think, in talking to Dad, they were in quite an isolated community, farming community, so I think that they probably escaped a lot of the, you know, day-to-day, if you're in a town, brushing shoulders with people and that constant, oh, you're still here, why are you still here? I think that they probably managed to avoid a bit of that, and also because they were farmers, although farmers were encouraged to enlist. Certainly at the beginning of the war there probably wasn't quite as much pressure, and somehow they managed to avoid the ballot as well, so yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say? I want to thank you for coming and talking about these people, because every single one is a real person with a real story. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Probably just that I kind of wish I knew more, because sometimes in the research that I've done, quite often there are families who have, you know, an amazing archive or letters, and I guess that's why that obituary is quite important to me, because it is it's something tangible that I know somebody said about a relative of mine, you know. So in a way I wish that we had a lovely archive so I could spend time, because you know what it's like when you start to read these letters and these diaries, it's like you're spending time with these people, you know. So it would be nice if there was something so I could spend some time with them, but I'm grateful to know what I do, and I know a lot of people who know a lot less, so yeah, that's really.
Well, thank you very much, Fiona, for coming to talk to us today.
Thank you.